So what's up? What's up? It's your boy, the original cop with attitude, notorious COP, Zeke Arkham. And my guest today is the first podcast I ever did. When I first started off
Yeah.
with my social media account, and I'm sitting here talking trash on Twitter and putting my commentary out there, and this gentleman reached out to me, or I probably reached out to him. Either way, one of us reached out to the other one. And the very first podcast I ever did, my first podcast interview was his. So this is a full circle moment, and I've always wanted to interview him back because he's got some really good insight. When you read his tweets, when you listen to him talk, his interviews, he's someone I've always looked up to, sort of, and admired. So here we go, my friend Leonydus Johnson. Leonydus, how are you doing today?
Man, I'm good, Zeke. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a hot, muggy day in New York. You know, we're ending out August the right way, I guess. So I'm here.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear it. Yeah, it is. It's good to come full circle. Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me on, man. That's an honor. I appreciate that. And it is funny to come back full circle because I don't remember which one of us reached out to the other, but but we were talking about policing and it was a really good talk, yeah, talking about the different things, BLM, policing, and all the crazy stuff going on in the world with all the bias and everything and towards police, which you had some really good insight on that talk. So I appreciate that. So it's good to come back and discuss this stuff some more, man.
Thank you. Thank you. So for anyone that doesn't know you, Leonidas, tell us about yourself, how you started, what you're doing.
It's an interesting story because I never intended on getting into politics or any political commentary, and that was never something I was interested in. I voted for Obama twice. I was mainly a Democrat, and around the time when Mike Brown was killed, and actually it was more like the Trayvon Martin time period, but definitely when the Ferguson stuff was going on, and I realized that the media was lying to us and was really pushing this false narrative about hands up, don't shoot, and racist police and all this stuff. And like I said, I was mostly apolitical, even though I leaned more Democrat and I had voted for Democrats. And I was really paying attention, but that really caught my attention. And I started really looking into things, and I realized, oh man, the media is not telling the truth about anything. And what that did was it made me start questioning things. They said, if they're not telling the truth about this, then what else are they not telling the truth about? It turned out to be everything. Like they weren't telling the truth about anything at all. So and what happened was I just started putting the same thing as you. I started putting out my thoughts and things on social media, and eventually accidentally built up a following that way. People were interested in my thoughts and ideas, and I eventually started a podcast, and the rest is history. It just kind of happened. I started getting Fox interviews and News Nation interviews. People were reaching out and asking me to come on their shows and everything. So it wasn't really any. I always tell people I don't pursue this stuff. I don't go out and try to make these opportunities and things happen. It just kind of fell that way. But my main persona, Zeke, is just somebody that challenges the narrative, and that's really the theme of my podcast. Somebody that pushes back against what we're being told in the mainstream media, what we're being told in society and in our culture about what the truth is, or what the anti-truth is, and pushing back against that stuff and really sticking to what the actual truth is. So it's all about challenging the narrative and pushing back, and that's gotten me where I am right now. So it's been an interesting journey for sure.
No, I like that because I did the exact same thing. I tell people I voted for Obama twice. I grew up Democrat. I grew up in a Democrat kind of family where everyone always told me, Democrats are for us. They're for the black folk. They're for the working class people. So I did the same thing. I grew up believing that until I became a cop, and then I was able to see things from the inside, and I felt the same as you. They're lying. The media is lying about everything, and so I love how we have similar stories as far as our come ups, in social media world. Now you've got a book that you just wrote, right? Tell us a little bit about it.
So the book is called Raising Victims: The Pernicious Rise of Critical Race Theory. And it was really focused on the lies that are built around CRT and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, anti-racism, Ibram X. Kendi's whole shtick. It really takes those arguments and tears them apart piece by piece. The whole idea that critical race theory is not being taught in schools or that it's only in law school, these sort of lies that are being perpetuated whenever you push back against any kind of race-centric curriculum or race-centric training session in corporate America, or even race-centric policies in government, which we've seen. When you push back against that stuff and say you don't support CRT or anti-race, people say that, oh, well, that's not CRT. You don't know what CRT is. It's like, so the book is meant to explain exactly what CRT is in their own words, using their own words of the founders and the advocates to explain exactly what it is, what the goals are, and give people tools to push back against it, because it's not really enough to know what it is. You have to know how to fight it and know where it's heading, know what its goals are and what it's trying to accomplish, and then what the antidote is, what we have to do to push back against it and purge it from society, because it's a toxic, pernicious virus that absolutely needs to be expunged, or it's going to tear us apart. So hopefully the book operates as something that people can hold on to and to learn about what critical race theory is and use it as a tool to push back against it. And that comes out in February 7th.
Okay, absolutely. I've gone on record to say that I think that teachers need to be held more accountable. I think that there are great teachers out there who really care about their students, who are invested in their students and want them to learn. And then there are activists who are sort of cosplaying as teachers.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's the activists that we've got to really fight back against, because it's not like they're just influencing one kid, they're influencing an entire classroom.
Right.
And it's classroom after classroom after classroom. I've always said that there should be some sort of like cameras or something in the classroom. You can put it from a certain angle just to block out the students, or you can I don't know, have it audio only. I don't know how it can be done. Do you think the teachers are the first step to just sort of hold the teachers more accountable?
Well, I think absolutely. I think you're on. I've kind of floated something similar about putting cameras in classrooms, and you do have to worry about privacy issues and things like that. But there has to be some sort of transparency, and you're absolutely correct about teacher activists, and they're proud about that. They don't hide it. They come out and they say it explicitly that they're trying to implement their activist principles in the classroom, and they make no apologies about it. Now, when you push them and challenge them, then they'll try to obfuscate and pretend that they're doing something else. But they'll post TikToks and they'll tweet about it whenever it's just it's like, yeah, this is what I'm doing, when they think they're going to get applause for it. It's it's crazy. Oh, and here's something funny, man. Like, and well, not funny, but as much as we've heard about how critical race theory is not in schools, and teachers push back against this stuff and say you don't know what you're talking about. Just last month in July, the African American Policy Forum held a Zoom event where they called it the CRT Summer School. It was, wow. So this is a policy forum. They held an event called the CRT Summer School, and they were training teachers, man. They were training educators. Really? On how, listen, some of the different topics were like CRT and K through 12, how to teach about race, organizing and teaching against white narratives in social studies textbooks. I mean, this is the stuff that they're pushing in these training sessions. And it blows my mind that when people say like, no, you don't know what you're talking about, it's not in schools. It's definitely there. Teachers are being trained in this stuff. And you talk about teacher accountability. In my mind, I know the activist teachers are out there and they're pushing this stuff on the kids. We all know that. But what we need the other teachers who aren't completely sold on this stuff, who are just capitulating, to stand up and push back, because I think that's where the problem really is, that you have all these teachers that are kind of just going along with it, or not saying anything, either because they're scared or because or maybe they think that maybe this is good intentions. Maybe this is good intentioned, and maybe this is the right thing to do, even though they're not completely activist about it, and they go along with it. And we see that not just even with CRT, but we see that with the gender stuff, and we saw it with the COVID stuff, and people just going along to get along, and just not being the nail that gets the hammer. So, and that's just what it requires. If there's going to be a change in schools, there definitely needs to be more transparency about curriculums, which we know the unions don't want that. They've come out and they pushed back against it, saying, "Oh, we already have transparency." Oh, so well, if we already have transparency, why are you opposing transparency laws? That makes no sense. But so the unions are against it. The teachers are, a lot of these activist teachers are against transparency. So we definitely need more transparency. Parents need to know what's happening in the classroom. And then we also need teachers to stand up and say, no, this is not right. We're separating kids by race in the classroom, making decisions about what to teach by race, making decisions about what kind of classes to have by race is wrong. It's absolutely the incorrect way, immoral way to approach these issues. And we just need more teachers in the system, because I know that there's good teachers out there. There's many good teachers out there who can stand up and say that we're not going to do it. And that's what we need, Zeke. We need good people to stand up and say no.
I like how you brought up the teachers' unions, because I was actually going to ask you about that. We saw, like you said, we saw what happened with COVID, where it's almost like the teachers' unions were fighting to keep schools closed.
Yeah.
And now it's coming out. There's a shortage of teachers. Many teachers are leaving the profession. Parents are taking their kids out of school, especially here in New York, or they're putting their kids into private school or looking at home teaching. Between governors who are mandating COVID shots for students and parents aren't comfortable with it. Between these teachers who, like I said, are cosplaying as teachers and are really activists. They want to brainwash your kid. They don't care what you have going on at home or whether you agree with it or not. They want to come in, they want to teach sexuality to kids, whether it's in elementary school, junior high school, high school. I think there was that parents teachers forum where one of the parents was reading out of one of the books that was assigned. It was so pornographic they had to shut it down. What's how do we fight back against this besides telling your kid, hey, just tell me everything? Is the answer to pull your kid out of school and start home teaching? Go to charter schools? Like what's the answer?
I think public schools might be irredeemable at this point, honestly. And I call them public schools. They're really government schools is a more pertinent term. We never should have let the government be in charge of children's education. That never should have happened. And what we're dealing with now is the predictable fallout of doing that. So yeah, I homeschool. I say I, my wife and I homeschool our kids, and we pulled them out around the time that the COVID stuff was going on. But we had always intended on doing that at some point, and the COVID stuff really just forced our hand, and we were like, yeah, now's the time to do that. So we homeschool our kids, and we have much more control over their education and much more control over what they're exposed to and what they're learning. And that doesn't mean that they're sheltered. That doesn't mean that we shelter them from any of the stuff that's going on in the world, but it does mean that we control what they're exposed to, and we don't have to worry about them being indoctrinated. So if that's transparency is only the first step, and that's not, it's more of a band-aid than anything, because what's going to happen is, and we've already heard it from some of these activist teachers, that they're going to try to figure out ways around it, and they're going to be sneaky about it. I remember during the COVID lockdowns when they were doing Zoom classrooms, there were teachers that were saying they had a little get together where they were saying that we need to figure out a way to teach kids without parents in the room.
I remember that.
Unbelievable. I mean, they were literally conspiring to figure out how to get to children without the influence of their parents. And it's just, I mean, any other profession, anything else outside of government, that would be a huge red flag. I mean, can you imagine hiring a babysitter And like she tells you that you can't tell her how to babysit and you have no right to know what goes on when you're not home. Like
Yeah,
she
it's
would be
called you're
fired.
fired. Yeah.
Yeah, you're fired, or if not arrested. Like, I mean, my
Yeah.
gosh. But yet, for whatever reason, government, these activists believe that it's okay for them to do that, to go behind parents' backs and infuse these ideas. So, yeah, I think pulling your kids out of school is the answer. But I also think that there has to be some form of free market forces that are happening. So I'm an advocate for school choice. And I think that parents should be in full control of where their children get an education. And I think that if government schools, and that includes homeschooling, but I think that if government schools have competition, if they have to fight for the dollars that follow children rather than just get money straight up, directly to them. If the money followed the student, then those government schools would have to adapt, and um, they would have to compete. Otherwise, people are going to be pulling kids out of school left and right and putting them in private school or homeschooling them with those dollars. So yeah, I think it's multi-pronged issue. I think that there has to be some free market forces, free market competition. I think there also has to be transparency, and people have to know what's going on in the schools, and parents should just have full control of their children's education. That just seems common sense to me. That shouldn't even be controversial. Of course, parents should have control of their kids' education. Doesn't matter if Randy Weingarten agrees with what the parents think or not. Why should she be in control of what kids are learning? It makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, it's an issue of the government being involved in education. So the less government, the better. And that's really the solution for most things in our society, to be honest.
Well, I think that's also why, especially in blue states, they've been so afraid of charter schools, because
Yeah.
charter schools operate outside of the standard Department of Education
Right.
guidelines, and they get to teach. And kids have been doing better in charter schools, and that frightens a lot of Democrat-run cities and Democrat elected officials so much, because now it takes the control out of their hands. Which like I said, I agree with you. It's common sense. I should have the utmost say in what my child is being taught.
Right.
But it's almost like the Democrats and the leftists don't want to cede that control. But why the rise in activism? You made a point one time. I saw you on Jason Whitlock, and you said, you've got people today, whether it's the activists, whether it's Black people, whether it's BLM, that are more angry about the civil rights struggle and are more angry about slavery than the people who actually went through the civil rights struggle and slavery. My granddad actually went through the civil rights struggle, and he's preached more about unity and togetherness than anybody else I know. My great granddad, who grew up in 1920s North Carolina, until he died, preached about unity and forgiveness. And why are people today so angry who actually have it the best in this world?
We can only speculate, but it's a great question. And it's interesting because you talk about your grandfather, and you see that a lot from older Black men, particularly like Thomas Sowell, Shelby Still, Walter Williams, who passed away not long ago. Rest in peace. But yeah, these guys went through that, and yet they have no sense of victim mentality. Even though they went through much worse stuff than anybody alive today is going through. Lizzo has no idea.
Oh boy.
Lizzo has no idea what Thomas Sowell went through. I mean, it's incredible. And one of the examples I always bring up is Booker T. Washington. And he wrote Up From Slavery, which is, just an incredible autobiography. And that was published 36 years after slavery was abolished. 36 years. So, 1901, I think. But for him to have such a positive outlook on life and to have such optimism and have no hate in his heart, no sense of vengefulness or seeking retribution or hatred against the slave owners. I mean, this Booker T. Washington was an actual slave. He was a literal slave. Like born into slavery, and for him to have that kind of attitude, it's just I wish we could have a time machine so people could go back and talk to him and tell him how oppressed they are in 2022 and just see what he says. I mean, it's unbelievable. But I do have a theory, Zeke, and I think that it has a lot to do with identity and how you view yourself as a person. Now, the civil rights movement and the idea of pushing back against racism created a sort of Black identity in this country, and it was more out of survival than anything, to have that cohesiveness, that cohesive community, Black identity overcoming the struggle, right?
Right.
And that had been an identity. And critical race theory is actually born out of that identity, where this idea that the civil rights movement came along and accomplished pretty much what it set out to do. And then after that, then what? If you rooted your identity in overcoming racism and pushing back against the man and pushing through the struggle, if you're always the underdog overcoming this thing, if that was your identity, then once that's taken away, what do you have? Like, what are you going to do? Like, you're either going to adjust and you're going to transform your identity, or you're going to find a reason to perpetuate that identity. And I think that's what happened with critical race theory. And they say that explicitly. They say that the civil rights movement stalled out and they needed something new in order to fight the hidden racism that had embedded itself in society. But that's what they were doing. There's a concept called St. George in retirement syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. And I'm forgetting the name of the guy who coined it now. I'm gonna have to go back and look. But basically what it is, you have St. George, the dragon slayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
He goes out. He's a heroic dragon slayer. He slays all the dragons in the land. He saves the village. He's this huge hero. He places his entire identity in slaying dragons. So when all of the dragons are slain and he goes into retirement, he suddenly has an identity crisis, right? Like he's spent his whole life slaying dragons. Like his entire existence has been formed around dragon slaying. And now he doesn't have that. Now it's gone. Now he's in retirement. He doesn't know what to do with himself. So what happens? All of a sudden, he looks out of his window and who knew? There's a dragon out of nowhere. So he grabs his sword, puts on his gear, puts on his armor, runs outside and slays the dragon. Yeah. Now all of a sudden he's surrounded by dragons. There's dragons everywhere. There's dragons that bark. There's dragons that quack. there's there's dragons that even claim to be villagers, right? But he slays them all. And then eventually he's seen just swinging his sword at thin air, proclaiming to slay the most fearsome dragon of them all. But I think that's such a good allegory for not just critical race theory, but a lot of the victimhood hustling that we see happening in our society, that these people who really believe in it, they've placed their entire identity in this sense of victimhood and oppression. And when that's gone, when there's no more dragons to fight, then they fabricate them, they create them, they start seeing them everywhere. They're hidden, they're invisible, Zeke. You can't see them unless you have a degree, unless you have a special degree in dragon slaying. You can't see them. So you have to trust them, and you have to recognize that they're the ones who understand what it means to slay a dragon and to see a dragon, and their entire identity comes back. Now they can be seen as a dragon slayer again. So I think that's what's happening. I think people have placed such profound importance on victimhood when it comes to the Black identity that you can't tease the two apart. So you take away the victimhood, you take away Black, and people lose their sense of self. So if they can't be a victim, then they can't be themselves. And I think that's what's happening.
I've always said that. Like when I speak to activists, when I speak to people who can still consider themselves revolutionaries, I'm like, well, we won. Like the fight's over.
Yeah.
The arena is empty. They've taken
Right.
down the ring. We won. There were speeches, there were marches. Laws were signed into effect. We
Yeah.
won. And then they go, yeah, but we're still oppressed. Oppressed where? Where is this oppression going on, and who is it under? And
Right.
and no one can ever give me a good example. Like, speaking of Lizzo, and I barely know who this woman is. Like, I've seen a couple pictures of her. I try to avoid any kind of interaction, with people who are, oh, did you listen to the new Lizzo? No, I didn't. I felt
Yeah.
myself losing brain cells. Cardi B,
Right. Right.
Cardi B is bad enough, and now there's like a
Right.
jumbo-sized version of Cardi B. But
Yeah.
I saw a clip where apparently she won some sort of award last night, and she said you have to vote for people who are in order to change the laws or something to that effect. The laws that are oppressing us, I think is the phrase she used.
Yeah.
And my question is, what laws are oppressing us? You've got, but I bring her up because you've got Obama, who both Obamas, Michelle and Barack, who continue to push this narrative that they're oppressed. A former president, former first lady, they're still oppressed somehow. LeBron James, who's a billionaire, is still oppressed. Jay-Z, who's a billionaire, is still oppressed. You've got these people who are multimillionaires who push the oppression narrative and the oppression message so much. Maybe I consider you one of the smartest guys I know. What are they still fighting against?
I don't know. I appreciate you saying that, but I don't know about that. But yeah, it's mind blowing, and I've made this point. We talk about people like LeBron or Obama. I mean, who have reached the pinnacle of success, of what I would consider success in America, and yet they still consider themselves to be oppressed. So you think about issues of racial equity, what the progressive mantra would call it. And so if you would compare somebody like Barack Obama or LeBron James to some random white guy from Appalachian, West Virginia, who's living in a trailer with dirt floors, where is the racial equity? How would racial equity even begin to address that problem? I mean, clearly there's a massive gap in between them. And yet we would say that LeBron and Barack Obama and Lizzo are more oppressed or more victimized than the guy in West Virginia with dirt floors. So it's just from a rational standpoint, it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. But it's all about narrative, and it's all about emotional manipulation. So we can look at these things and we can be rational about it, and we can be logical about it, and we say clearly the former president of the United States is not oppressed. clearly that is not happening. But if you buy into this idea that the entire system is imbued with racism, that the entirety of our society is racist, and racism is just woven into the fabric of our institutions, then you buy into the idea that it affects everybody, no matter how much success you achieve, no matter where you land on the income or wealth hierarchy, no matter even if you think you're not oppressed, even if you think that you're not victimized, you still are affected by it, and because it's in the system. And this is the kind of thing that critical race theory promotes. It promotes this idea of cultural hegemony, which basically means that in this case, it would be white supremacy that has built this system that creates a status quo in our society, and everybody goes along with the status quo because that's just the way that things operate. And so everything, our interpersonal interactions, our jobs, our education, literally everything falls under this umbrella of cultural hegemony and white supremacist status quo. So it's very clever. It's very clever because you can't falsify it. You can't say, well, look at all of this success that these Black people are having, because the system is still racist no matter what you say, no matter what evidence you show them. I I had a conversation with somebody one time about police shootings, and I was trying to show her statistics that showed that once you control for violent crime rate, that white suspects were actually more likely to be shot and killed by the police than black suspects. And even then, police rarely killed anybody of any race when you compare it to overall arrests, let alone overall interactions. And I was trying to show her this, but her response was that the statistics themselves were rooted in systemic racism. Hey, so there's no battling, there's no falsifying it, there's no battling against it, because even things that go against, even things that refute the argument are considered to be evidence that the argument is correct. So it's like, okay, so what do we even say at this point? You're going to say you're right no matter what. Even if you're proven wrong, you're like, oh, well, I was proven wrong. That just proves how right I was. It's like, what are you talking about? But that's the way it works. This is completely circular reasoning where it's constantly justifying itself without evidence. So, I mean, clearly those people are not oppressed. When they say they're oppressed, it's just pushing the narrative, and it's nothing more than emotional manipulation. And it drives me crazy, man.
My favorite is that there's now subcategories to racism. You know, there's environmental racism, which I'm like, you know what? I knew that sun was oppressing me. You know, I walk outside, it's hot. You know, I knew that sun was oppressing me. You know, the sun is racist. But you know, they got to come up with this sort of like sideways, like kind of thinking in order to explain, like in order to explain their point of view. You know, well, it's not the sun that's racist; it's where you live in relation to the sun and how it comes down. And I'm like, what?
We don't have enough trees, man. We don't have enough trees. It's racist.
Yeah, like what? I don't know what you were smoking or what you injected in order to come up with that kind of theory, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's what Jussie Smollett was doing, right? It's exactly what he was doing. He trying to fabricate this narrative that basically supports the idea that America is extremely racist. That's what he was doing. He almost got away with it, but I mean, we see all these stories. There's a joke that if you go into Google and you put, just a random word, and then you ask is this racist, you'll get results. So like, really? You'll find articles on that thing. So is sleeping racist? Is cereal racist? Just come up with a word, like put it in Google. I challenge you to try it, see what comes up. I'm telling you, I've done it myself. And yeah, I did the cereal thing, and I found that Kellogg's was racist. So it's mind blowing. But here, there was an article a few months ago, maybe it was a little bit longer than that, but it was in the Washington Post about how birders, like people who do bird watching, need to reckon with the history of racism in bird watching. This was in the Washington Post.
Wait, what?
Bird watching. Bird watching is racist, and people who bird watch now need to reckon with the history of racism in bird watching. You see these articles all the time. What was another one? There was like hiking, like going out, like the outdoors. Hiking was racist because there's not as much accessibility for Black people. I don't know if you knew this, but like going outside is really hard for Black people. We can't be doing that. That's unbelievable, man. But I mean, you see all this stuff, and again, it's just to prop up the narrative. It's the reason that people do race hoaxes. It's because there's not enough of real racism. I can't imagine articles like that being floated during the height of the civil rights movement. You know what I mean? Like Martin Luther King's like, what we really need to talk about is bird watching. Like it's not that's not what they're going to be talking about when there's real issues to deal with. So since the demand for racism outweighs the supply, then we have to come up with all this foolishness, this hidden racism, these microaggressions. We have to talk about how mispronouncing somebody's name is racial hate. I mean, it's just it's a way to hang on to that narrative and continue to perpetuate it. And again, I think I think it's part of an identity issue. And I didn't bring this up earlier, but the people who are in power, those they know better. I think they know better. They're pushing these things because they know that they can use it to manipulate people. They know that they can get in people's emotions and they can use it to gain power and money and influence for themselves. And they use it to manipulate people. So people like Jamel Hill, getting on there talking about, like, she knows better. She's using it as a tool to manipulate people. So it's crazy.
Well, as far as hiking goes and bird watching, I know just for me personally, I don't mess with wildlife like that. When I hear hiking, I hear there might be bears out there, and
right.
I hear,
racist bears, man.
Yes, racist bears. I mean, my wife and I were watching some reruns of Shark Week last night, and I said, "See, I admire this because I wouldn't be on the boat messing with sharks, trying to see like what they. That's just not me. But that's just me, So I'm very thankful to environmental racism or animal racism like that, because it's otherwise we wouldn't know anything about animals. That's a Cat Williams joke, but yes, I'm very thankful for in that kind of animal racism.
Yes, even though those Blue Jays are flying by, hurling the N-word at us, we're thankful for it. I mean, it's crazy. It's ridiculous. You have to laugh at it because it's almost so ridiculous. It almost seems like parody at this point, man. Like, it seems like if you would have told me 10 years ago that the Washington Post would be running a story on the racism in bird watching, I would have thought it was a joke. I would have thought you were messing with me. Like, sure, like, it's not going to be that bad. Like, they're crazy, but they're not that crazy. But nope, here we are, man. No bird watching. Got to reckon with the history. Crazy.
Well, it also keeps them relevant. It keeps them in a place where they're still down with the struggle. That's why Jay-Z, LeBron. You're a billionaire. You live in a house that I couldn't even pay the electric bill on. And you've reached the pinnacle of the American dream, and you still have to be down with the struggle, because if you're not talking about how oppressed you are, then that means that you're on the other side. Now you're the oppressor, and God, they can't have that. So that's why they have to keep bringing it up.
You make a good point there, and I think that has a lot to do with it. I think because it is Marxism in general, which something I talk about in the book is how critical race theory is actually neo-Marxist. We'll call it critical gender theory too. So it's actually neo-Marxist. All these movements that progressivism is pushing has roots in Marxism. And one of the key tenets of Marxism is separating society into half. So you have your oppressors and oppressed. You have your bourgeoisie and proletariat. And that's a basic tenet of Marxism. So like if they're going to say that, even though I have all this money and all this wealth, that I'm still oppressed, that would mean that, they're trying to identify themselves with the proletariat. And they're trying to identify themselves with the victims and not the oppressor. We're not bourgeoisie. No, not us. Even though we control mostly everything, but that's okay. Like we're like you guys. It's that kind of thing. So I think that's a good point. I think that that separation of moral good and evil, and then bourgeoisie, proletariat, oppressor, oppressed, oppressor, victim. I think that division, you find yourself on one side or the other, and that would make sense. That's why they do that. But again, a lot of it has to do with manipulation and victimhood and pushing that emotional manipulation for power and control. Yeah.
Now, why can't a lot of these CRT activists see the damage they're doing? You're telling black kids that they'll never really achieve anything in this country because of slavery and racism and the past and the civil rights struggle and everything. All these things that happened generations before they were born somehow still affects them today. This doesn't really happen for any other race. You're not telling the Chinese kids that they can't achieve because their ancestors built the railroads and were wholesale slaughtered, or Japanese kids were thrown in intern camps. You know, this isn't happening with anyone else. This is happening just with black children. And then
Yeah.
you're telling white children, and it's your fault that your ancestors all did this. And meanwhile, white kids are like, but I'm not racist. My best friend right here is black. My babysitter is black. Whatever. No, but it's still your fault because of something that your great 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 grandfather did. What's the end goal with this? Like, what are they trying to accomplish?
So critical race theory, if you read Critical Race Theory and Introduction by Richard Delgado, who was one of the founders of critical race theory, and they spell it out specifically what it is that they're trying to do. You ask why they can't see what it is that they're doing, the harm that they're doing. The reason they can't see it is the same reason every Marxist throughout history has not been able to see what their ideology was doing, is because they don't wake up, they don't see, they're blind to it until it's too late. They think that they're morally righteous and they're morally justified in doing everything that they're doing, and any negative outcomes are due to something wrong with the system, and so they need to fix it. But what they say, what Delgado says in Critical Race Theory and Introduction, is that there's two components to critical race theory. There's the academic component, and then there's the activist component. And so that's one thing I always bring up when people say critical race theory is not in schools, is that there's an activist component where they send out the people who are trained in critical race theory to do activism and to implement critical race theory anywhere they are in society, including in schools. And one thing Delgado says is that the civil rights movement, had stalled out, like I mentioned earlier, but that it was mostly focused on incremental change, step-by-step progress. And that critical race theory opposes that. It opposes incremental change and step-by-step progress. So now we know that it has an activist component where they're training people, not just in law, but throughout all sorts of academic subjects, including education. And you're seeing it everywhere now, implemented in society. And they're sending these people who are trained in critical race theory out to do the activist portion of critical race theory, which in schools, you could call it critical race praxis, because it's applied theory. They're applying the theory everywhere they go. And so you think about what would the opposite be of step-by-step progress and incremental change? Like, if they don't believe in that, then what do they believe in? Revolution. It has to be that. They have to believe in revolution. If they don't believe in incremental change, they believe in rapid change. They believe in change right now and doing it by any means necessary. So they believe in revolution, and they believe in training people in the activist portion and sending them out to be activists. So what we're seeing in society is that we're seeing neo-Marxist race activists, race and gender activists. We'll go ahead and include gender into that, infusing the ideology and trying to implement a cultural revolution. And they're so far relatively being successful with that. And you see something similar that happened in Maoist China, which I won't go into deeply about, but as far as basically upending society, tearing down all of the old institutions, and infusing the new communist ideology where the ashes lie, basically. And that's what they're trying to do. That's what happened in Maoist China during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. That's what's happening here, which we can call that the American Cultural Revolution, which is basically neo-Marxism. It's Marxism with race and gender replacing class. And they're trying to just tear it. And Mao himself said that in order to implement a new system of society, the old site must be swept clean. That's what Mao said that. And right. You could take that to heart for what critical race theory believes. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sweep clean the old site, all the old beliefs, all the old ideas about what is rational and what is logical, the nuclear family, our ideas about race and relationships, our ideas about education, our ideas about healthcare. Pick a subject, anything in our society, they're trying to tear it down completely, to wipe it clean, and then implement their ideology on top of it. And they're not going to see any of the negative effects that are happening from the implementation of this ideology, because they think that any negative effects that occur are due to the brokenness of the system that exists. And it's further evidence that the system needs to be torn down. It's just, it's insane. It's insane. So this is what we're dealing with. But, people think that it's just racism disguised as fighting racism. And I've said that before. That's basically what it is on the surface. But underneath, it is a neo-Marxist movement that's meant to implement a cultural revolution.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot. I mean, it highlights how destructive this can be just our fabric of this country.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're really trying to destroy the country from within.
Absolutely. And they'll tell you explicitly that they don't believe in things like free speech. They don't believe in tenets of liberalism, the real meaning of liberalism, that is, liberty, free markets,
Right.
the idea of individualism. They don't believe in those things. They push back against the idea of rights themselves, and they've said that explicitly, that they're suspicious of that. And the reason why they push back against all of these things is because they say that those things are wrapped up in white supremacy. And so white supremacists, or people who are white, I should say, benefiting from a system of white supremacy, they're the only ones that get free speech. They're the only ones that get rights. They're the only people who get liberty and seen as individuals or whatever. So they oppose all of these concepts, these bedrocks of our society, because they think that they're all tainted by white supremacy. And so, yeah, they want to tear everything down because they think that the white supremacist poison, or at least they say they think that the white supremacist poison has infested everything, literally everything. And so the only way to get it out is to tear everything down. Like Ibram Kendi said, the only remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy for present discrimination is future discrimination. They want to destroy everything. They want to go in and they rip everything out and then put their ideology in its place. And that's the best way I can put it. It's just, it's very pernicious and it's very dangerous. And I'm not sure people recognize just how dangerous it is.
Well, he certainly called it, Kendi, because you have, again, people like my granddad who fought against segregation and who fought for everyone to be together. And now you've got grandchildren and children of people who are in the struggle now advocating for segregation. You've got people who go, I need this. I need a blacks only space at this college campus. I think they were doing it at Harvard, which with David Hogg there and now Bill de Blasio teaching a class there, that Harvard degree is going to be worthless in a couple of years.
Right.
They just let anybody in, but they had a separate graduation at Harvard, and now they've got blacks only spaces where you got black people saying, this is a space just for black people. This is our safe space, and if anybody else comes and tries to sit there, you're oppressing me by sitting at a table that's in a black space. So they're definitely trying to push back towards the past and bring that segregation and separation, and it's almost like they're trying for a new type of racism. So you're 100% right, but it's almost like now they want their pound of flesh, for towards people in the present, for, like I said, for what their ancestors may or may not have done, because not every white person you see, their ancestors owned slaves. So I mean, it's almost like they have this disjointed, discombobulated theory that is destructive all around.
Yeah. And there was another case, UC Berkeley, I think it was. There was a house that was supposedly a POC, or BIPOC or whatever that term is, like that non-white. We'll just say non-white house because everybody was welcome except for white people at this house. And like there were like mixed students who had a black parent and a white parent, and they couldn't bring their white parent to the house
Yes,
because white
yes,
people were not allowed.
I remember
It's
that.
just yeah. So you see these kind of stories all over the place, and I think you're absolutely right that they want to basically flip the tables and create a society where they're the ones who are calling the shots as far as um, from an oppressive standpoint. Like they want to be the people that are pushing power on other people as far as oppressing them. And we saw that, and what comes to mind is the Kyle Rittenhouse case. And one point I always make is that when you hear terms like racial justice, it doesn't actually mean justice. It means vengeance. What they want is they want vengeance. They want revenge. And and again, like you mentioned, it comes from the history of racism and this sense of historical identity that these people have, that white people need to pay some kind of penance. So you said a pound of flesh. They need to pay for the historical wrongs, and there needs to be some kind of perpetual reparations. And I'm not talking about financial reparations. I'm talking about people bowing down and being whipped with a cat of nine tails perpetually. And that needs to happen over and over and over again in order to pay for that, in order to maintain this sort of ideology and maintain this narrative. But the Kyle Rittenhouse case, none of the people he shot were black at all. But yet we heard calls for racial justice because of that case. And so it gives insight into what's actually happening in the ideology. And I realized it was a BLM riot or protest, if you want to call it that. It was a riot.
Mostly peaceful.
mostly peaceful. Right. And I realized it was that. So there's that connection to it, but none of the people involved were black. So like, how could it be a case of racial justice? But they didn't care. They didn't care about the evidence. These race activists didn't care that Kyle Rittenhouse was chased. They didn't care that he was beat with a skateboard. They didn't care that his life was in danger. They didn't care about any of the facts surrounding the case. All they cared about was this hypothetical black version of Rittenhouse and what they thought would happen to him if he had done what Rittenhouse had done. And they created this whole narrative around it, this whole fake story around a hypothetical Black Rittenhouse who would get shot by police or get destroyed or get sent to prison for life. If he were black, this would happen. So because they created that in their head and believing that this was the story of racism in the country and that this would absolutely 100% happen to a black person, then they thought that should happen to Kyle Rittenhouse. They thought that didn't matter, that he was innocent. None of that mattered. All that mattered was the narrative of race and racism and racial oppression, and the fact that they thought Kyle Rittenhouse should have to pay for that. So it's about vengeance. It's about revenge. And we see that over and over and over again. The whole George Floyd thing that set off the whole summer of love.
Right.
Even to this day, there is absolutely no evidence that what happened to George Floyd had anything whatsoever to do with race. There's not a single scintilla of evidence that suggests that race played a factor in what happened to him. Yet, that's the only thing that we're allowed. That's the only frame of reference we're allowed to have. That's the only way we can conceptualize the story is through a racial lens. We're not allowed to see it any other way. And then Derek Chauvin had to be punished for it. And you can have your own ideas about his guilt or his innocence, but that doesn't matter to the race activists. What matters is that George Floyd was black, Derek Chauvin was white, and that Derek Chauvin needs to be punished for what happened to George Floyd because he was white. the black police officer that was there, that nobody even knows his name. Like, even like, he was
Nope.
there. Like,
Nope.
he was on George Floyd's back. Nobody knows his name. The Asian police officer, nobody knows his name. Nobody talks about it, because that's not what they're concerned with. They're concerned with retribution. They're concerned with vengeance. And, you look at the anti-racism movement, you look at the CRT movement, you even look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools, or in corporate America. And it's all based around this idea that white people must pay for the sins of their ancestors, and they have to pay for the racism in society. Like, it's all built around vengeance and not around any sense of justice whatsoever.
Well, I mean, listen, I could talk to you all day because I mean, we're getting fired up here. But last
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
question before I let you go.
All right.
You and I have talked at length about BLM
Yeah.
and what they've done, and you and I have sort of, I guess, the same goal to expose BLM and sort of make them irrelevant.
Yep.
I loved what you did last year when you were highlighting children who were being killed in cities and being ignored by BLM, because it doesn't push their narrative. And here you are saying these are children. I think you had one stat for, I think, 16 and under, and then you had another stat for, I think, 12 and under. But you were highlighting it and bringing attention to it when literally no one else was. And you were asking, where's BLM in this? Why aren't they using their resources to highlight these murders? If Black lives matter and they truly care about Black lives, why aren't they outraged about these babies being killed?
Right.
And no one had an answer. And then it came out that BLM was buying large mansions with their donations, and this is in the midst of, mayors, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, painting Black Lives Matter all over the streets, and in DC and in Seattle, I think they did as well. Where do you see BLM in history? When we're talking about BLM 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, where do you see them in history? And do you think people are going to wake up to the scam that was run on them?
Yeah, I'd like to be optimistic about it. And I'd like to think that people will eventually recognize that they've been hustled and they've been grifted by this organization. And we've said from the very beginning that BLM is nothing more than an exploitative organization that's feeding on people's sense of injustice and in victimhood, and feeding on their emotions, getting them to donate all this money. And we knew they were shady. We knew they were shady anyway from the beginning, but we definitely knew they were shady when no one knew where their finances were going. Nobody could figure out what they were actually doing for communities. And then we find out that Patrice Collars is buying mansions and using the money. It's like, and like, still, it's crazy because I bring that up to people and they think that I'm just, they still think I'm just self-hating. They think that I'm just trying to bring down Black people. Like, why are you attacking Black people? Why are you trying to bring down Black people? Like, why don't you think Black lives matter? It's like, you're not understanding. Like, the BLM organization is toxic. They're fake. Like, whatever issues you think you're having, like, I may disagree with you as far as racism in society, but whatever issues that you think you're having with racism, BLM is exploiting that, and they're using you for financial and power, financial gain and power. But yeah, as far as where they're going to go in history, I don't know, Zeke, because even now, even with all of that stuff exposed, they're still around and they're still doing stuff, and people are still attaching their name to it and still doing hashtag Black Lives Matter. Nobody seems ashamed of it yet. So I don't know how much worse it needs to get before people wake up and they realize that, oh my gosh, this organization is crazy. This is ridiculous. We've been hosed. It seems like they're always looking for some kind of excuse to get around it. And I remember the conversation with Don Lemon and Terry Crews. I don't know if you remember that. where Terry Crews was pointing out that same thing, that BLM wasn't really focusing on inner city violence, where black people were killing black people, which ends up being like in 2020 it was like almost 10,000 black homicide victims, and nearly all of them were killed by other black people. And Terry Crews brought that up, and Don Lemon says, no, BLM only focuses on police brutality. And so you see those kind of arguments kind of sneak in to kind of get around that, but try to make sense of the hypocrisy that's happening. They only focus on police brutality, even though they were formed by after Trayvon Martin was killed, who was not killed by a police officer, even though they were all over the Ahmaud Arbery case, who was not killed by a police officer, even though they were all over the Jussie Smollett case, who was a complete hoax. It had nothing to do with police. I mean, all of these cases, BLM is there protesting, that have nothing to do with police, but they don't want to touch the inner city violence cases. There were 78 children that year, 2020, who were killed under the age of 13, and BLM didn't highlight one of them under age of 13 killed in street violence. And then I had been tracking kids under the age of 18. Zeke, man, it was like over 500 that year. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it anymore because it was too many. It was too many cases. I didn't have the time to track. So I restricted it to under 13 the subsequent years, which I'm doing it this year again. And I think it's up to like 50. But BLM never highlights those cases, never talks about them. Only when it involves something they think they can exploit. So I would hope people wake up to it. They're clearly a fraudulent organization. I would hope people do their own research. Just do your own research. Look into the claims. Look into the police stats. Look into what's actually happening, and make your own decisions. Don't let Patrice Collars come out and swindle you, and so she can buy another mansion. My gosh, it's crazy. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I don't know.
Well, she's not only buying herself mansions, but then she's paying off her baby daddy a 6-figure income just for hanging out, when all their financials. Yeah, it's for the cause.
For the cause, man.
I love it. I couldn't help but laugh. She said that buying those mansions is investing in the black community because it's investing in her. It's investing in her.
I mean, in some twisted sense, that makes sense, I guess. I mean, she's black technically, so she's investing in the black community. You should feel good for me because I'm being successful on the money that you gave me. So, yeah, amazing.
Leonydus, where can we find you on social media?
Oh, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. At Leonydus Johnson. It's spelled Leonydus Johnson. And then my website is leonydusjohnson.com. And again, the book comes out February 7th. It's Raising Victims. You can pre-order it now. So go do that.
That's right. I'll be posting this both on my my podcast network and on YouTube and on Facebook. So the title of the book will be right there. All your links will be there. So
awesome.
So I'll have everybody go out and read and educate yourself on CRT and fight back against it because the future of our children and this nation is at risk. 100%. So Leonydus, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for having this talk with me. Thank you so much for giving me that first podcast experience way back when I had about 5,000 followers. So
you're big time now, man. I love it. Yeah. No, I appreciate you, Zeke. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was good talking to you, man.
Absolutely. And thanks for everything you do. And for all the rest of you, this is Zeke Arkham, the original cop with attitude, the notorious COP. And as always, I got you 6. Thank you. God bless and good night.